Okay, so for those of you who were able to make it, here is the texture review. After you review this, I want you to then go onto Canvas and take the texture test. Again, I will give you a code for the texture test at the end, and I'll write it right here. So at the end of this, we'll do that. First thing I want to review is some common mistakes I saw with individuals who struggled on this test. And the most common mistake was that they were mixing up these all the time and thinking that they kind of all were connected. So what I want you to think is we have a town called Texture. And in this town are two houses. And each house has a top floor and a basement. Okay? Those are the stairs. Okay. In this house, we have implied and actual. And in this house, we have simple and complex. They live in the same town, but they are not the same house. They're separate concepts that both fall under the name texture. So I want to make that clear that there's a big separation between these two, okay? Let's start with the one that I saw the most, right over here. So what I saw a lot was that a student would draw a pattern or a texture and they'd do it super fast, and then they'd add a little bit of color. I'd be like, okay, well that was fast, so it's simple. And that is not true. That is incorrect. Simple is about how many values there are. So it's not how quick it is or how easy it is, it's how many values there are. In this case, we have 1, 2, 3 values, which makes it complex. So if we want to do a simple texture, we can make it complex in difficulty or in the way it looks. But whenever I'm referring to simple in this class, simple textures, we mean the number of values is less than 3. So it's 1 to 2 values. Okay? When we're talking about complex, we can have multiple values, even if we're just using a pencil, right? I can take one color and increase or decrease the pressure that I'm using that color at, even if it's a relatively easy pattern to do, as long as the values are different. So this has 3 or more values. Wait, sorry. Let's just say number of values. This is why I'm not a math teacher. I did it wrong. 3 or more. Okay? So that's the difference between these two. That's the only difference. It's not how easy it is to draw or how hard it is to draw. It's the number of values. The other mistake I saw people do is that they would draw an object, like I'm going to draw an orange, and then they would say, this is the texture. This whole thing is the texture, and that's not true. If I zoom in, that is the texture, but this is an object, and this object has a simple texture with 1 or 2 values. So when I ask you to draw a texture, don't draw an object, draw what's on the object. Another example would be, I have a shirt I'm wearing right now. Let's go ahead and show you. So my shirt, if I draw my shirt, I'm drawing an object, and I can draw the outline of my shirt. There you are. I could draw the outline of my shirt and it's not going to change the texture. But this, that's texture. It's a zoomed in on top of it, right? And I can have lots of shirts that look the same on the shape of them, but they have a different texture. So don't draw the object, draw what's on the object. So we're zooming in really far. If we go over to the other half of the town, the other house, we have implied and actual. So implied is everything you're going to see on this screen is implied because you can't actually feel it. So if I was asked, what grade do I have in this class? And I said, ooh, well, I'm not actually telling you what grade you have, but I'm implying that it's bad. Or I could be like, ooh, well, yeah, I mean, I think, and that would imply that it's good. I'm not actually telling you anything, right? So implied, you don't get to actually feel the texture. You only see it. Okay. Now you can have an object with both of these. You can have an actual texture and an implied texture. I can see a texture on it, but it feels different than what it looks like. That was like their brick wall at the front of the class. But these two are separate things. This is the top floor, this is the bottom floor. They're separate floors, they're just closely related. So an implied texture would be the dots on the orange, because you can't actually feel those. You just see it. This is implied. And an implied texture can be simple or complex. These are a separate idea, separate house, but they can be both of them. So an object can, or a texture can have both of these, but they aren't necessarily connected. So an implied texture is not necessarily always simple, and it's not always complex. So for actual texture, we got to switch our camera on. Let me put that back on. So here I have a piece of tissue paper. And if I am asked to change the texture of this paper and create actual texture, anything I draw on the paper is going to be implied, because I'm not changing the way the paper feels, right? In order for me to change the way the paper feels, I either have to add or take away from the paper. So right now, the paper feels really smooth. So I have damaged the paper. Now it feels different. This is actual texture, not implied. Sorry for the auto-focusing. Over here, I have a lovely painting with some lovely textures, but it doesn't feel any different up here than it does down here. None of this is actual texture, it's all implied. If we look at this iguana, on this iguana, I have a nice texture right here that I can feel. I have a texture right here that I can feel. I have a texture right here that I can feel. The painting on it doesn't change the texture, but it might create an implied texture like it does up here. On the white, I can't feel any of that, the little lines, but it does change the way it looks, right? But the way it looks and the way it feels are separate things. So actual is feeling and implied is looking. So if I want to add or create a texture, I have to add to the paper, I have to damage the paper, I have to tape something to the paper, I have to change the way the paper feels to create actual texture. Most of you got the definition of texture correct, which is the feeling of art. Now that feeling can be implied or actual, way down there. Both of those are totally fine. And implied textures can be simple or complex. And all the textures we make in art that we make on paper that are not sculptures or 3D are implied. So if you have questions, you can ask me before you take your test. The code is WHMS art, like that, sorry. So feel free to take the test. You can take it multiple times. Do not use notes, so no notes. What I would like you to do is to get a piece of paper, just like we do in class, divide it into 4 pieces, write 2, 3, 4, 5. Answer, the first question is just typed. The second question is going to ask you to draw something, so you'll draw your stuff. Third question will ask you to draw something. Fourth and fifth will ask you to do something. When you finish a answer, I recommend that you take your photo right away, because a lot of you are not renaming your photos like you should in your files. So in your Google Docs, when you take a photo, you're not renaming it. And because of that, I'm getting really weird stuff turned in. So let me see if I can find a bunch of my files that are not renamed. So whenever you go to turn in stuff and we have a million images and you're trying to find the right one, a lot of you were turning in the wrong images. So in order to rename, you just click the 3 dots and click rename. And you can rename your file so that you know it's answer 1, answer 2, answer 3, answer 4, answer 5, etc. And that way we don't get confused. Or instead of doing that, you can just turn in the question right away. So as you can see, these images right here with the cats are a bunch of random names, and we want to know what they are whenever we go to turn in the question. So I recommend that you either rename your files or that you turn them in right as you take the test. You can use a pencil, you can use color pencils. Okay, if you have questions again, feel free to email me. And again, this is the code, and you can retake it as many times as you want without notes. No notes. Thank you.